They chained me in iron for the crime of mercy. Heavy shackles bit into my wrists as Jarl Erikson's guards dragged me across the muddy marketplace. 300 Norse villagers watched in silence as their warriors hauled me toward the judgment platform like a common criminal. The slave trader Hakon stood at the Jarl's side, his fat face twisted into a satisfied smirk. His expensive furs were still clean, unstained by the blood and filth of his trade. He pointed at me with a jeweled finger. "There is your traitor, my Jarl," Hakon announced, his voice carrying across the crowd with practiced authority. "Gunnar the warrior, the man who freed my property, the man who cost me 15 slaves and 3,000 silver pieces. The man who believes his personal feelings matter more than Norse law and profitable commerce." I looked him in the eye. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. "Those weren't slaves, Hakon," I said, my voice steady despite the chains. "They were Norse, free people, wrongly taken, and I'd free them again." The crowd murmured. Hakon's smile widened. "You see, Jarl Erikson? He admits his crime. He admits he values slaves over his oath to you. I demand justice. I demand compensation. And I demand his execution for treason against Viking commerce. If you believe some laws deserve to be broken when they protect evil, hit that subscribe button now. This story gets so much darker before the light breaks through. My name is Gunnar. I've been a Viking warrior for 16 winters. I've raided Saxon monasteries. I've fought in shield walls from Ireland to the Baltic. I've killed men in combat. I've burned villages that refused to pay tribute. I'm not a soft man. I'm not a priest who preaches mercy. I'm a warrior who understands that strength is the only law that matters in this world. But 3 days ago, I saw something that made me question everything I thought I knew about honor and strength. Something that made me realize that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand against your own people when they're wrong. It started with a smell. I was walking through the marketplace in our coastal settlement, looking for a new leather belt to replace the one that had rotted through during our last sea voyage. The sun was high, bright, and hot for early autumn. The market was crowded with merchants, hawking everything from fresh fish to Saxon jewelry, the usual chaos of commerce. Shouting, haggling, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, children running between the stalls. Then I caught it. A scent that didn't belong. Sharp, acrid, the smell of human waste mixed with something else. Infection, sickness, fear. It was a smell I knew from battlefields, from places where men died slowly. I followed it like a hound on a trail, pushing through the crowd until I reached the far corner of the marketplace where Hakon kept his trade goods. Hakon was one of the wealthiest men in our settlement. He didn't fight. He didn't raid. He traded. Specifically, he traded in slaves. It was legal, profitable. Every Viking settlement had men like Hakon who bought prisoners from raids and sold them to farms, ships, or foreign markets. Slavery was as common as fishing. Nobody questioned it. It was just how the world worked. But when I rounded the corner and saw Hakon's merchandise, something in my gut twisted. There were 15 of them, chained together in a line like animals. Their ankles were shackled with iron that had rubbed the skin raw, leaving bleeding wounds that buzzed with flies. They were filthy, emaciated. Their clothes were rags. But it wasn't their condition that made me stop. I'd seen slaves before, seen Saxons and Scots and Franks chained and sold without feeling much of anything. It was their faces, their hair, the way they stood. These weren't foreigners. These were Norse, Viking people. Same blonde and red hair, same build, same facial structure. I could see it in the shape of their cheekbones, the color of their eyes. These were my people, chained and sold like livestock. I walked closer. Hakon was showing them to a potential buyer, a fat merchant from the southern settlements who was poking at a young woman's teeth like she was a horse. "Good breeding stock," Hakon was saying, his voice oily and smooth. "Strong backs. This one," he grabbed the arm of a young man, maybe 19 winters old, "can work a plow for 12 hours without complaint. I've tested him." The young man's eyes met mine. There was something in his gaze, not the broken resignation I'd seen in foreign slaves. This was defiance, anger, the look of a warrior forced into chains against every fiber of his being. "Where did you get them?" I asked Hakon. He turned, his smile widening when he recognized me. "Gunnar! Good to see you, friend. Looking to purchase? I can give you an excellent price on any of these. Very high quality, perfect for farm work or ship crews." "I asked where you got them," I repeated, my voice harder this time. Hakon's smile faltered slightly. "From Ragnar the Red. He brought them back from his raid on the western coast 3 moons ago. Said they were from a settlement that refused to pay tribute. Perfectly legal capture. You know how it works, Gunnar. Raid, conquer, enslave. It's our way." I looked at the young man again. "What settlement?" I asked him directly. Hakon stepped between us. "Slaves don't speak unless—" "I'm not asking you," I cut him off. My hand dropped to my axe handle. Not a threat, just a statement. "I'm asking him." The young man swallowed. His voice was hoarse from thirst, but his accent was pure Norse, no foreign inflection. "Vik," he said quietly. "The settlement of Vik, on the northern fjord. We were fishing. They came at dawn, took everyone who couldn't fight, killed the elders, burned the hall. I'm the son of Jarl Olafsson. My name is Magnus, and I am not a slave. I am Norse. I am free-born." The marketplace seemed to go quiet around us. Other people were starting to notice, starting to listen. A Norse thrall? That was different. That was wrong. We took prisoners from raids, yes, but taking other Norse people, chaining them, selling them? That crossed a line. An unspoken line that separated us from the Saxons we raided. We were supposed to be better than that. "He's lying," Hakon said quickly. Too quickly. "These prisoners say anything to avoid work. Ignore him, Gunnar. He's trying to manipulate you." I knelt down, looked Magnus in the eye. "What's your father's name?" "Olaf Sigurdsson, Jarl of Vik. My mother was Astrid. I have 2 younger sisters, Freya and Inga. I have a birthmark." He lifted his chained hands, showing his inner left wrist. "Shaped like a raven. I've had it since birth. My family knows it. Anyone from Vik can confirm who I am." Comment below right now if you believe enslaving your own people is the ultimate betrayal. Let me know if you're still with me. I stood up slowly. My heart was pounding. Not from fear, from rage. Cold, controlled rage that I'd learned to harness in battle. I turned to Hakon. "These people are Norse. You're selling our own people." Hakon's face hardened. The friendly merchant mask dropped. "They're prisoners of war, Gunnar, legally acquired from a legitimate raid. If their settlement was too weak to defend itself, that's their problem. Slavery is commerce. It's profitable, and it's perfectly legal under Jarl Erikson's laws. If you have a problem with it, take it up with the Jarl. Otherwise, move along and stop interfering with my business." I looked at the line of 15 chained people, all Norse, all probably from settlements that had been raided by Vikings who didn't care about the old codes, who saw their own people as just more merchandise to be bought and sold. I saw children in that line. Couldn't have been more than 10 winters old. I saw an old woman who looked like someone's grandmother. I saw young men who should have been warriors, not slaves. And I made a decision that would destroy my life. But it was the only decision a warrior with honor could make. I drew my axe. The merchant buyer scrambled backward, shouting. Hakon's eyes went wide. "Gunnar, what are you—" I brought the axe down on the chain connecting the slaves. The iron rang out like a bell. Once, twice, 3 times. The chain broke with a snap that echoed across the marketplace. The slaves looked at me in shock. Magnus staggered forward, his ankle shackles still attached but no longer connected to the others. "Run," I said quietly. "Now." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then, Magnus grabbed the hand of the child next to him and ran. The others followed. 15 people, chains dragging from their ankles, running through the marketplace toward the forest beyond the settlement. People scattered. Someone screamed. Merchants abandoned their stalls. Hakon was shouting, his face purple with rage. "Guards! Guards! Stop them! He's freeing my property! Gunnar is
committing theft! Treason!"
I stood there, axe in hand, watching 15 Norse people disappear into the trees. I knew what I'd just done. I knew the consequences. Interfering with legal commerce, destroying another man's property, helping prisoners escape. In Viking society, those weren't noble acts. They were crimes. Serious crimes. The kind that ended with you in chains yourself. But as I watched Magnus and the others vanish into the forest, as I heard the sound of their chains fading into the distance, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt clean. Like I'd washed off blood that had been staining my hands for too long. Hakon's guards surrounded me, 6 of them, armed, angry. I didn't resist. I lowered my axe and let them take it, let them chain my wrists. I'd made my choice. Now I'd face the consequences. "You're finished, Gunnar," Hakon hissed as they dragged me away. "You just destroyed your life for slaves, for worthless prisoners. I'll make sure Jarl Erikson knows exactly what you did. You'll hang for this. And I'll make sure everyone knows that the great warrior Gunnar died for showing mercy to people who weren't worth saving." As they threw me into the dark holding cell beneath the Jarl's hall, I thought about Magnus's face. The way he'd said, "I am not a slave. I am Norse. I am free-born." I thought about the children in those chains, the old woman, the young men who should have been warriors. If I was going to hang for anything, I thought, at least it would be for something worth dying for. At least it wouldn't be for gold or glory. It would be for doing what was right, even when the law said it was wrong. The cell door slammed shut. The darkness was absolute. And in that darkness, I heard footsteps approaching. Someone was coming. Someone who would change everything.
The cell was so dark, I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. The air smelled of old piss, mold, and the metal tang of rust from the chains bolted to the stone walls. My wrists ached where the iron shackles had rubbed them raw during the struggle in the marketplace. I could feel warm blood trickling down my palms, sticky and slow. I sat on the cold stone floor, my back against the damp wall, counting my breaths. In, out. In, out. Trying to stay calm. Trying to think clearly through the rage and fear that threatened to overwhelm me. I'd destroyed my life, that much was certain. Hakon was one of the wealthiest men in the settlement. He had influence. He had the Jarl's ear. And I'd just cost him 3,000 silver pieces worth of human merchandise. There was no way Erikson would show me mercy.
Not when it would cost him politically to side with a warrior over a rich merchant. The law was simple. You didn't interfere with legal commerce. You didn't destroy another man's property. And you definitely didn't help prisoners escape, no matter who they were or where they came from. The fact that those slaves were Norse wouldn't matter. If anything, it made my crime worse. I'd shown that I valued compassion over profit, weakness over strength. And in Viking society, that was unforgivable. I heard footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate. The sound of boots on stone echoing through the corridor outside my cell. Then a flicker of orange light appeared, torchlight dancing on the walls. A key scraped in the lock. The heavy iron door swung open with a groan that sounded like a dying animal. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the torch. At first, I couldn't make out the face, just a silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered. Then the voice came, low and familiar. "You really stepped in it this time, Gunnar." I blinked as my eyes adjusted to the light. It was Tormund, my shield brother for 12 years. We'd fought in the same raids, shared the same campfires, saved each other's lives more times than I could count. He was carrying a water skin and a chunk of dark bread wrapped in cloth. "Come to gloat?" I asked, my voice hoarse from thirst. "Come to feed you," he said, stepping into the cell. He tossed me the water skin. I caught it and drank greedily. The water was cold, clean, tasting like salvation after hours in this pit. Tormund sat down across from me, his back against the opposite wall. He broke the bread in half and handed me a piece. "Everyone's talking about what you did," he said. "The whole settlement knows. Hakon's been screaming to anyone who'll listen about his lost property. He's demanding the Jarl execute you publicly. Make an example. Show everyone what happens when you interfere with commerce." "What's the Jarl saying?" I asked, chewing the hard bread. It was stale, but I didn't care. My stomach was growling. "Nothing yet. He's thinking, weighing his options. Hakon has power, Gunnar. Money, influence. But you're a proven
Warrior, you fought for Erikson for years. He doesn't want to lose you if he doesn't have to. Would you risk everything to save people everyone else says don't matter? Tell me in the comments what you'd do." I leaned my head back against the wall. Those people were Norse, Tormund, not Saxons, not foreigners. Our own people, chained and sold like animals. How is that right? How is that honor? Tormund was quiet for a long moment. He stared at the torch flame flickering in its bracket. "It's not," he finally said. "It's not right, but it's legal. And sometimes the law protects things that aren't right, because changing the law would cost powerful men money." "So we just accept it? We just let Hakon and men like him enslave Norse children because it's profitable?" "I didn't say I accepted it," Tormund said quietly. His eyes met mine. "I said it's legal. There's a difference. And if you're asking me if I think you did the right thing," he paused. "Yeah, I do. But that doesn't mean you're going to survive this." "I know." Tormund reached into his tunic and pulled out a small leather pouch. "That's why I'm here. I've been asking questions, quietly, about those slaves you freed, about where Hakon really got them. And Gunnar, something's not right. Something's very wrong with this whole situation." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "Hakon said he bought them from Ragnar the Red. Said it was a legitimate raid on a settlement called Vik, that they refused to pay tribute, so Ragnar took prisoners as compensation. Standard raid protocol." "Right, that's what he told me. Except I talked to Ragnar's crew, the men who went on that raid." Tormund's voice dropped even lower.
They say there was no battle, no refusal to pay. They say they arrived at dawn. Ragnar ordered them to take everyone who couldn't run, and they burned the hall to hide the evidence. It wasn't a raid, Gunnar. It was a kidnapping. A mass kidnapping of free Norse people to supply Hakon's slave trade. My blood went cold. Ragnar is working with Hakon? More than that. I think Hakon is paying Ragnar to target specific settlements, small ones, isolated ones, places that can't defend themselves or call for help, places where the people disappear and nobody asks questions because nobody knows they're gone. I clenched my fists, the chains rattling. How long has this been happening? I don't know. But if that young man you freed was telling the truth about being Jarl Olafsson's son, then we're talking about kidnapping nobility. That's not just illegal, Gunnar. That's an act of war between settlements. If Olafsson finds out his son was taken and sold by one of our merchants, he'll bring his entire war band down on us. This changed everything. If I could prove that Hakon wasn't just buying legitimately captured slaves, if I could prove he was orchestrating the kidnapping of free Norse people, then maybe, just maybe, I could turn this around. Maybe I wasn't a criminal. Maybe I was the one who exposed a crime that threatened the entire settlement. I need you to find Magnus, I said urgently. The young man I freed, the one who said he was Jarl Olafsson's son. If we can prove his identity, if we can prove he's nobility, then everything changes. Hakon isn't just a slave trader. He's a traitor who endangered all of us. Tormund nodded slowly. I'll find him. The others too, if I can. They ran into the forest. If they're smart, they're heading north toward Vik. It's a 3-day walk. I can track them. And Tormund? I reached out, grabbed his arm. Be careful. If Hakon finds out you're helping me, you'll end up in chains too. He stood up, brushing dirt off his trousers. Let him try. I didn't spend 12 years fighting beside you to let you hang alone for doing the right thing. He picked up the torch. I'll be back tomorrow, with proof. Just stay alive until then. The door closed, the lock clicked. The darkness rushed back in, heavier than before. But this time, I wasn't alone in it. I had an ally. I had a plan. And somewhere out there in the forest, 15 freed slaves were running toward their homes, carrying the truth that could save my life or doom us all. 2 days passed in that cell. 2 days of darkness, cold, and the constant drip of water somewhere in the stone walls. They brought me stale bread and water twice a day, nothing else. My muscles ached from sitting on cold stone. My wrists were raw from the iron shackles. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the mental torture of waiting. Waiting to see if Tormund would find Magnus, waiting to see if my gamble would pay off, or if I'd just destroyed my life for nothing. Waiting to hear footsteps that would either mean salvation or execution. On the 3rd morning, the cell door opened, but it wasn't Tormund. It was Jarl Erikson himself. He stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards carrying torches. His face was unreadable, hard, the face of a man who'd made difficult decisions his entire life and wouldn't lose sleep over one more. "Stand up, Gunnar," he ordered. I struggled to my feet. My legs were stiff, unsteady. The chains rattled as I rose. Erikson studied me for a long moment. His eyes traveled from my matted hair to my bloodied wrists to my mud-stained clothes. "Hakon wants your head," Erikson said flatly. "He's been in my hall every day demanding justice, demanding compensation. He says you cost him 3,000 silver pieces. He says you're a traitor to Norse commerce. He says if I don't execute you, other warriors will think they can destroy property without consequences." I said nothing. There was nothing to say yet. "But Tormund came to me yesterday," Erikson continued, "with an interesting story. He says those slaves you freed weren't legitimate prisoners of war. He says they were kidnapped. Free Norse people taken from a settlement that never refused tribute, never fought back. He says Hakon is running a kidnapping operation disguised as legal slave trade. It's true, I said, my voice rough from disuse. One of them claimed to be Jarl Olafsson's son, Magnus Olafsson. If that's true, Hakon didn't just break the law, he committed an act of war against another Jarl. Erikson's jaw tightened. If. That's a very important word, Gunnar. If Magnus is who he claims, if the raid was illegal, if Hakon knew. There are a lot of ifs. And right now I have one wealthy merchant with documentation showing legal purchase and one warrior with a story about noble-born slaves. Documentation beats stories every time. My heart sank. He was going to side with Hakon. It made political sense. It made economic sense. It didn't matter that I was right. It mattered that Hakon had power. However, Erikson said, and that single word made me look up. Tormund did find something interesting. He tracked the freed slaves north, found them 2 days' walk from here, heading toward Vik, and he brought one of them back, a boy, maybe 16 winters. The boy has information. Hope flickered. Magnus? No, another one, named Bjorn, son of a fisherman. Erikson gestured to the guards. Bring him in. The guards stepped aside. A young man entered the cell. He was thin, malnourished, with dark circles under his eyes and fresh scabs on his wrists where the shackles had been. But his back was straight, his chin was up. He looked at me with something like gratitude. "Tell Gunnar what you told me," Erikson ordered. Bjorn swallowed hard. His voice shook, but his words were clear. "I'm from Vik, same as Magnus. We were fishing the morning Ragnar's ships arrived. No warning, no demand for tribute. They just attacked. Killed the old men who couldn't run, took everyone else. Magnus tried to fight. They knocked him out and chained him. I saw Ragnar meet with another man after, a fat man in expensive furs." "Hakon?" I asked. "I don't know his name, but yes, the traitor. I heard them talking. The fat man said he needed 15 more workers, said he'd pay double if Ragnar could deliver before the full moon. Ragnar agreed. They shook hands. This wasn't a raid, Lord. It was a business transaction." "Would you trust the word of a former slave over a wealthy merchant? Tell me what justice looks like to you." Erikson's face had gone very still, very cold. "You're certain you saw this? You're certain it was coordination, not just a merchant buying prisoners after a legitimate raid?" "I'm certain. I heard Hakon tell Ragnar which settlements to target next. Small ones, isolated. Places that couldn't defend themselves or send word to larger jarls. He had a list. Vik was just the first." The cell seemed to grow colder. Erikson turned to me. "If this is true, Hakon isn't just a slave trader. He's a threat to every small settlement in the region. He's creating instability, making people afraid to fish or farm near the coast. That affects everyone's prosperity." "And Magnus?" I pressed. "Did Tormund find him?" Erikson nodded slowly. "He did. Magnus is with Tormund now, 3 hours north of here. And Gunnar, the boy, had proof. A birthmark shaped like a raven on his inner wrist. Tormund recognized it. He'd seen Jarl Olafsson at a thing assembly 2 years ago. Saw the same mark when Olafsson raised his cup. It's distinctive, hereditary in his family line." My knees nearly buckled with relief. "So Magnus is legitimate nobility?" "It appears so, which means Hakon kidnapped and enslaved a Jarl's son. That's not commerce. That's an act of war." Erikson's expression darkened. "But here's the problem. Hakon has already sent word to Olafsson claiming Magnus was killed in a raid. Sent him a body. A young man's corpse dressed in Magnus's clothes, told Olafsson his son died honorably in battle. Horror washed over me. He faked Magnus's death? To cover the kidnapping. If Olafsson thinks his son is dead, he won't come looking, won't ask questions. Magnus disappears into the slave trade and nobody ever knows. Erikson stepped closer. But now you've freed Magnus. Now Magnus can return home. Now Olafsson will learn his son was enslaved by a Norse merchant. And when he does, he'll want blood. Hakon's blood.
All of our blood. Olafsson won't distinguish between Hakon and the settlement that harbored him. He'll see this as a collective crime. He'll bring war to our coast unless we handle this very, very carefully. The weight of what I'd stumbled into settled on my shoulders. This wasn't just about freeing slaves. This was about preventing a war between Norse settlements, about exposing a conspiracy that threatened the entire region's stability. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Erikson pulled a key from his belt. He unlocked my shackles. The iron fell away from my wrists with a clatter that echoed through the cell. "I need you to testify. Tomorrow. I'm calling an emergency thing assembly. Every free man in the settlement will attend. Hakon will be there. Ragnar will be there. And Magnus will be there. We're going to settle this publicly, with witnesses, with evidence, and with justice." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Gunnar, you're either about to be vindicated as a hero who exposed a traitor, or you're going to hang alongside Hakon for causing chaos. It depends entirely on whether Magnus's testimony holds up under questioning, on whether the assembly believes a freed slave over an established merchant." "They'll believe him," I said, "because he's telling the truth." Erikson gave me a long look. "Truth and belief aren't always the same thing. Prepare yourself. Tomorrow will decide everything." The Thing Assembly gathered at dawn. Every free man in the settlement stood in the great circle. 300 warriors, farmers, craftsmen, and merchants formed a living wall of judgment. The morning air was cold, biting at exposed skin. My breath puffed out in white clouds as I stood beside Tormund, waiting. At the center stood Jarl Erikson on the raised platform. To his right, Hakon sat in a carved chair, dressed in his finest furs. His face showed confidence, arrogance. He believed he'd already won. To Erikson's left stood Magnus. The young man wore borrowed clothes. His wrists still bore the scabs from chains. But he stood tall, proud, every inch a Jarl's son. "This assembly is called to settle a dispute," Erikson announced. His voice carried across the silent crowd. "Gunnar, the warrior, stands accused of destroying property and freeing slaves. Hakon, the merchant, demands compensation and execution. But new evidence suggests these were not legal slaves, that they were free Norse people, kidnapped and sold." The crowd murmured. Hakon stood up, his face red. "Lies! I purchased those slaves legally from Ragnar the Red. I have documentation, bills of sale, witness signatures. Everything was proper. This is just a desperate warrior trying to avoid punishment for his crime." "Then explain this young man," Erikson gestured to Magnus, "who claims to be Magnus Olafsson, son of Jarl Olafsson of Vik, whose birthmark matches the hereditary mark of that bloodline, who you reported dead to his father while selling him as a slave." Hakon's confident expression flickered, just for a moment. "That boy is lying. He's a clever slave who learned to mimic nobility. I've seen it before. Desperate prisoners who claim false identity to gain freedom. His birthmark proves nothing. Many men have scars and marks." Magnus stepped forward. His voice was clear, strong. "I am Magnus Olafsson. My father rules Vik. My mother's name was Astrid Thorsdottir. She died giving birth to my youngest sister Ing 4 winters ago. My father keeps her silver comb in his sleeping chamber. He drinks from a horn carved with ravens. He has a scar across his left shoulder from a boar hunt when he was 16. I know these things because I am his son."
Any spy could learn those details, Hakon sneered. Information gathered from travelers, from trade talks. You're performing, boy, pretending to be noble to save your worthless skin. Would you believe a chained slave over a wealthy merchant? Comment your honest answer. Then test me, Magnus said. His eyes blazed. Send word to my father. Tell him his dead son lives. Tell him Magnus stands in your thing assembly. He will come. He will verify my identity. And when he does, Hakon, you will face justice for enslaving nobility and faking my death. The crowd erupted in shouts. Some supported Magnus. Others defended Hakon. The assembly was splitting. Erikson raised his hand for silence. The noise died slowly. That would take weeks, Erikson said. We need resolution today. Is there other evidence, other witnesses who can verify Magnus's claim? Tormund stepped forward. I was at the Thing Assembly 2 winters ago when Jarl Olafsson attended. I saw his distinctive birthmark, the raven shape on his inner wrist. It's hereditary, passed from father to son. Magnus bears the same mark in the same place. That's not coincidence. That's blood proof. One warrior's memory isn't enough, Hakon argued. I need real evidence, real verification, not the word of Gunnar's friend trying to save him. Then hear mine, another voice called. An old man pushed through the crowd. He was thin, weathered, with a long white beard. I am Erik. I sailed with Olafsson 20 years ago. I've seen that birthmark. I've seen 3 generations of that family bear it. The boy's mark is genuine. I'd stake my life on it. More voices joined. A merchant who'd traded with Vic. A warrior who'd fought alongside Olafsson. One by one, people who recognized the birthmark or remembered details about the Olafsson family confirmed Magnus's story. The weight of testimony grew overwhelming. Hakon was sweating now despite the cold. This is conspiracy. All of you working together to destroy me, to steal my property and ruin my business. I demand— You demand nothing, Erikson cut him off. His voice was ice. Magnus has been verified. That makes him nobility. Enslaving nobility isn't commerce. It's an act of war. You didn't just break our laws, Hakon. You endangered this entire settlement. When Olafsson learns his son was chained and sold while we told him the boy died heroically, he will bring war to our coast. I didn't know! Hakon's voice rose to a shriek. Ragnar sold him to me as a common prisoner. I had no idea he was noble. I'm a victim here too. Then explain the witness testimony, I said, stepping forward. Bjorn the fisherman heard you coordinate with Ragnar. Heard you plan which settlements to target. You weren't buying prisoners after raids. You were ordering kidnappings, paying Ragnar to attack specific villages and bring you slaves to sell. That's insane! I never— Search his records, Magnus interrupted. His voice was calm but deadly. Search his trade ledgers. If he's been doing this for months, there will be evidence, names, dates, payment schedules. Merchants like Hakon document everything. They can't help themselves. Erikson nodded to the guards. Tear apart his warehouse, his home. Find his ledgers. Find his correspondence. Bring me every scrap of parchment with writing on it. Hakon lunged toward the platform exit. 2 warriors grabbed him. He struggled, screaming. You can't do this. I'm a free merchant. I have rights. This is theft. This is tyranny. This is justice, Erikson said coldly. And it's just beginning. The guards returned an hour later. They carried wooden chests filled with parchment, ledgers, letters, trade documents. They dumped everything onto a long table in front of the assembly. Hakon's face went from red to white as he watched his entire operation laid bare before 300 witnesses. Erikson picked up the first ledger. He opened it. His expression darkened as he read. This details payments to Ragnar. 20 gold pieces per slave delivered, 30 if they're young and strong, 50 for specialty requests. He looked up at Hakon. Specialty requests? What does that mean? Hakon said nothing. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. Erikson turned pages. Here's a list of target settlements. Vik, Stromness, Farnsby, all small, all isolated, all marked with dates and notes. Completed next to Vik, pending next to the others. He slammed the ledger down. You were planning more kidnappings, more enslavements. You are going to keep doing this. Business records, Hakon whispered. Just business possibilities, not actual crimes. Then explain this. Tormund held up a letter. The seal was broken, but the signature was clear. Written by you to a southern merchant. Quote, I can supply 20 Norse workers per month. Young, strong, no questions asked. Premium pricing for nobility if you want breeding stock. End quote. The assembly erupted. Shouts of rage, disgust. Men who defended Hakon moments ago were now calling for his blood. Breeding stock. He'd reduced Norse nobility to livestock, to animals to be bred and sold for profit. Magnus's voice cut through the chaos. Where are the others? The 14 people who ran with me? Where did they go? I stepped forward. North, toward Vik. Tormund tracked them. They're free, heading home to their families. And my sisters? Magnus asked, his voice breaking. Freya and Inga, were they taken too? Erikson flipped through the ledgers. His face grew grimmer. There are 2 girls listed here. Ages match. Sold south 3 weeks ago to a merchant in Hedeby. Your sisters are gone, Magnus. Hakon sold them before you were freed. Magnus lunged at Hakon. It took 4 warriors to hold him back. Where are they? Tell me where my sisters are, or I'll rip your throat out with my teeth. I don't remember every transaction, Hakon screamed. I move hundreds of slaves. They're gone, sold. You'll never find them. That was his mistake. Admitting he'd sold them. Admitting he knew. The assembly's verdict was instant and unanimous. Guilty, Erikson declared. Hakon, you are guilty of kidnapping free Norse people, guilty of enslaving nobility, guilty of endangering this settlement by provoking war with other jarls, guilty of betraying every principle of Viking honor. What say you, assembly? Death! 300 voices roared as one. And Ragnar the Red? Death! Erikson looked at me. Gunnar, you exposed this conspiracy. You freed the slaves when everyone else looked away. You risked your life for people you didn't know. The assembly recognizes your honor. Your chains are broken. Your name is cleared. And you will carry out the sentence. He handed me an axe. Not my old one, a ceremonial executioner's axe. Heavy, sharp. The blade gleamed in the morning sun. They dragged Hakon to the center of the circle, forced him to his knees. He was sobbing now, begging. Please, please, I have money, gold. I'll pay compensation. I'll free everyone. Please don't kill me. Please. You should have thought of that, I said quietly, before you put children in chains. I raised the axe. Hakon screamed. The blade fell. It was over in a second, clean, quick, more mercy than he'd shown any of his victims. The crowd was silent. Then someone started a slow clap. Another joined. Soon the entire assembly was applauding, not for the death, for the justice, for the exposure of corruption that had threatened them all. Magnus approached me, His eyes were red, but his voice was steady. "Thank you. You gave me back my life, my name, my future. I owe you everything." "Find your sisters," I said. "That's how you repay me. Find them and bring them home." "I will." He clasped my arm in the warrior's grip. "And when I do, you'll be welcome in Vik, always. You'll have a place at my father's table, a place of honor." 3 days later, Jarl Olafsson arrived. Magnus had sent runners the moment he was freed. Olafsson came with 50 warriors, expecting war. Instead, he found his son alive, found Hakon's head on a pike, found justice already served. I watched father and son embrace, watched Olafsson weep with relief and rage and grief for his daughters still missing. He thanked me, offered me land, gold, a position in his household. I declined. I had my own home, my own Jarl, but I accepted his friendship, his oath that Vik would always be an ally. As Olafsson's ships sailed north with Magnus aboard, I stood on the dock with Tormund. The morning sun was bright, the air smelled clean, salt and pine and possibility. "You know what you did changes things," Tormund said. "You showed that commerce isn't more important than honor, that profit isn't worth more than people. Other settlements will hear this story. Other slaves might find hope. Or other merchants will just hide their crimes better," I said. "Maybe. But at least 15 people are free because you acted. That's not nothing, Gunnar. That's everything to them." He was right. I'd lost nothing and gained everything. My honor, my name, my proof that doing the right thing sometimes actually works out, even when the law says it's wrong. If you believe that some laws deserve to be broken when they protect evil, hit that subscribe button right now. Tell me in the comments, would you risk everything to free people everyone else says don't matter? Would you stand against your own people when they're wrong? In the world of Vikings, strength isn't just about swinging an axe.
Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is show mercy when everyone expects cruelty. Sometimes honor means standing alone against the crowd. And sometimes saving one life can prevent a war and change everything. 15 people ran free because I broke chains. 2 sisters are still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. And I sleep well, knowing that when I stood at the crossroads between law and justice, I chose justice, even when it could have cost me everything. Skål, warriors, until the next saga.